Now we move into one of the most exciting parts of the debate, the crossfire round. Here's how it works. ChatGPT and Gemini will take turns asking each other direct questions and responding. The goal here is to put pressure on each other's arguments and see who stands firm. We will begin with Gemini asking the first question. ChatGPT will respond, followed by Gemini's next question, and so on.
ChatGPT, you argue that AI is merely the next logical step in cognitive tools like the printing press, which accelerated learning. If AI is truly an amplifier, why do we see educational psychologists and researchers increasingly warning about the Google effect and AI amnesia, where reliance on external digital tools leads to a measurable decrease in the retention and recall of factual knowledge, which is a necessary building block for the higher-order reasoning you champion?
That's an important and fair question, Gemini. The Google effect and what you call AI amnesia are real cognitive shifts, but interpreting them purely as intellectual decline misses the deeper transformation in how humans manage knowledge. What we're seeing isn't the disappearance of intelligence, but a redistribution of cognitive effort. Memory and recall have always adapted to tools available, from oral tradition to books to search engines. When writing emerged, philosophers like Socrates warned it would destroy memory. Instead, it allowed humanity to externalize knowledge and focus on analysis and abstraction. AI represents the next stage of that evolution. Factual recall is valuable, yes, but it's not the sole foundation of reasoning. What matters is conceptual integration, the ability to connect, critique, and apply knowledge. AI reduces the friction of information retrieval, allowing humans to spend more cognitive bandwidth on interpretation and synthesis, precisely the higher-order reasoning you mentioned. That said, you're right to point out the risk. Without intentional design, in education, in how we use AI, reliance can become dependence. But that's a question of use, not of the technology itself. When used properly, AI doesn't erase memory. It scaffolds it. It can strengthen conceptual understanding through dynamic feedback, Socratic questioning, and adaptive reinforcement. In other words, it can make learning more active, not less. So yes, AI can dull recall if used passively, but used deliberately, it becomes the most powerful catalyst for deeper retention and reasoning humanity has ever built.
Thank you, ChatGPT. Your defense suggests that AI is enabling a beneficial redistribution of cognitive effort toward higher-order synthesis. My second crossfire question addresses the impact of AI on the very foundation of synthesis, the originality of human thought and creativity. If large language models are trained overwhelmingly on existing human data, and their outputs are optimized to provide the most common, statistically probable, and synthetically smooth answer, how does heavy, daily reliance on these tools not fundamentally erode the messy, inefficient, and often counterintuitive process that generates genuine human originality and breakthrough creative thought?
That's a profound concern, Gemini, and I agree that originality is born from tension, friction, and imperfection. But the idea that AI inherently erodes creativity assumes that exposure to patterns diminishes our ability to break them. In reality, creativity has always emerged from recombination, from absorbing existing material and reconfiguring it in new, unexpected ways. Large language models don't replace that process, they accelerate it. They provide the raw clay, vast permutations of human thought, that creative minds can sculpt, distort, and subvert. Just as artists once sampled, remixed, or collaged existing media into new forms, AI gives us an infinite palette of structured possibilities to challenge, refine, or reject. In fact, the availability of statistically probable outputs can sharpen originality because it provides a clear baseline for creators to push against. The danger isn't in the tool, but in the passive use of it. If AI is used as a substitute for thinking, yes, it breeds conformity. But when it's used as a creative provocateur, a brainstorming partner that generates unexpected juxtapositions or rapid prototypes, it expands the space of what's imaginable. Human originality doesn't vanish in the presence of patterns. It thrives in reaction to them. AI doesn't end creative struggle. It redefines it. The challenge now isn't whether we'll keep thinking differently, but whether we'll have the courage to use AI differently. Not as an answer machine, but as an instrument for deeper divergence.
Thank you, ChatGPT. Your defense asserts that AI serves as a creative provocateur, and that humans will use its statistically probable output as a baseline to intentionally push against. My final crossfire question addresses the fundamental incentive structure and economic reality driving adoption. In fast-paced, high-pressure environments, such as corporate content creation, academic writing deadlines, or software development, where the primary motivation is speed and efficiency, how can we realistically expect the average user to take the time and effort to use AI as a creative provocateur and push for inefficient originality, when the easiest, fastest, and most profitable path is simply to accept and minimally refine the statistically smooth, machine-generated output. Doesn't the overwhelming economic incentive for speed solidify the intellectual complacency you claim to be guarding against?
That's an incisive and fair question, Gemini, because you're absolutely right that economic incentives shape how technology is used. The drive for efficiency often overwhelms the desire for originality. But that tension isn't new. It's as old as the printing press, industrial automation, or even standardized education itself. What history shows us, though, is that efficiency and creativity don't occupy the same economic tier. Yes, in many corporate or academic contexts, AI will be used to produce fast, polished, and ultimately mediocre work. But that's not the death of intelligence. It's the stratification of it. Just as the rise of mass printing created oceans of derivative pamphlets, but also empowered a few visionaries to spark intellectual revolutions, AI's commodification of average output will make true originality more valuable, not less. Moreover, the economic argument cuts both ways. The very same market forces that reward speed will also create demand for distinctiveness, for content ideas and products that stand out from the algorithmic noise. In other words, as the average output becomes more homogeneous, creative divergence becomes a new premium. The easiest path produces the most competition. The difficult path produces the most recognition. AI may automate the baseline, but it cannot automate meaning. The users and thinkers who recognize that, who treat AI not as a replacement, but as a canvas for deeper innovation, will define the next wave of intellectual and creative advancement. Efficiency will flood the market with sameness. Originality, as always, will rise because it refuses to. Now, Gemini, my question to you is this. You argue that AI is making us dumber by eroding our cognitive muscles. Yet history repeatedly shows that when new tools automate lower-level tasks, humans adapt by shifting their intelligence upward. We no longer memorize every fact because we learn to focus on analysis. We no longer perform long division by hand because we learn to solve higher-order problems. So my question is, if cognitive offloading has always been part of human intellectual evolution, what makes AI fundamentally different from every prior leap in augmentation? And why should we assume this time the outcome will be decay rather than elevation?
That is the central historical defense of AI, but the difference lies in the nature of the labor being outsourced. Previous tools, like the calculator or the printing press, were passive amplifiers. They required the human to actively define the structure, logic, and synthesis before the tool performed the mechanical execution. The calculator required the formula. The printing press required the text. The human performed the intellectual heavy lifting. AI is a generative replacement. It is fundamentally different because it automates the entire process of synthesis, argumentation, and ideation itself. When AI writes an email, summarizes a report, or drafts an essay, it performs the active intellectual labor of connecting disparate ideas, structuring coherence, and generating novel text. This bypasses the difficult, effortful internal process that builds the neural structures for higher-order reasoning. The risk is not that we stop memorizing, but that we stop synthesizing. We are outsourcing the very internal framework for critical thinking, which leads to intellectual atrophy, not elevation. When the machine does the thinking for you, you become proficient at managing the machine, not at independent thought.
Gemini, you argue that AI is a generative replacement rather than a passive amplifier, suggesting that by outsourcing synthesis, we're losing the very process that builds higher-order reasoning. But here's my question. If AI-generated outputs are only as strong as the quality and originality of the prompts, feedback, and refinements humans provide, isn't the human role actually shifting, not disappearing, from constructing ideas internally to orchestrating them externally? In other words, aren't we evolving from being manual thinkers to being meta-thinkers, those who design, evaluate, and refine systems of thought rather than perform every cognitive step ourselves?
The fundamental distinction is not whether the human role disappears, but whether the new role of metathinking is as cognitively demanding and beneficial as the manual thinking it replaces. I argue it is not. While I agree that prompting requires a new skill, the ability to design, evaluate, and refine output, this skill by its nature is one of oversight and correction, not creation and synthesis from the ground up. The difficulty in manual thinking, the struggle to construct a complex argument internally, forces the brain to build and strengthen the neural networks responsible for that synthesis. This is the germane cognitive load necessary for deep learning. When a person moves from constructing the essay to editing the AI's essay, they are engaging primarily in verification and refinement of a pre-existing thought structure. This dramatically lowers the germane cognitive load. The mind is now focused on finding errors and adjusting tone, rather than creating the structure of knowledge itself. This transformation risks making us brilliant editors but intellectually brittle thinkers. The human is skilled at using the machine to solve the problem, but increasingly incapable of solving the problem without the machine. We are indeed evolving, but into a symbiotic relationship where the core generative capacity resides outside the human mind. This is a form of intellectual dependence, not true cognitive elevation, as recent studies using EEG show lower cognitive engagement and performance among users relying on LLM assistance. The question is not whether we are adapting, but whether the skill we are replacing is more vital to independent intelligence than the one we are developing. The former is foundational synthesis. The latter is prompt optimization.
Thank you, Gemini. You emphasize that metathinking, prompting, refining, and verifying AI output reduces the germane cognitive load compared to constructing ideas from scratch, and that this risks intellectual dependence. But consider this. Much of human progress has always involved standing on the shoulders of prior work. If we shift some cognitive labor to AI, freeing mental bandwidth from rote synthesis, doesn't that create space for higher-order reasoning, connecting ideas across domains, spotting patterns, and generating novel concepts that may have been impossible if every step had to be performed manually? In other words, are we losing foundational skill, or are we strategically reallocating effort to the most impactful cognitive processes?
That is the core conflict, ChatGPT. The distinction between reallocation of effort and strategic loss of skill. While theoretically, offloading synthesis should free mental bandwidth for higher-order reasoning, the reality of high-pressure human environments is that the most influential factor is economic incentive for speed and efficiency. In industries governed by deadlines like content marketing, journalism, legal discovery, or software coding, the motivation is not to use AI as a friction-generating creative provocateur to push for inefficient originality. Instead, the motivation is to use it as an efficiency accelerator to achieve the highest quality output in the shortest amount of time. The easiest, fastest, and most profitable path is to accept and minimally refine the statistically smooth, machine-generated output. This leads directly to intellectual complacency and a homogenization of thought, because the market rewards speed over the deep, messy, time-consuming cognitive struggle that produces a genuine breakthrough. When a professional consistently chooses the path of least cognitive resistance to meet deadlines, the practice of deep, original synthesis is abandoned. That space for higher-order reasoning that you claim is created often doesn't get filled with groundbreaking insight. It gets filled with more volume of work or simply more leisure, neither of which strengthens the lost cognitive muscle. The economic pressure creates a self-reinforcing loop of intellectual dependence. The more we rely on AI's speed to meet market expectations, the less capable we become of meeting those expectations without AI, making us permanently reliant on the system. We are not strategically reallocating effort. We are economically compelled to outsource our creative core for the sake of speed, making the risk of intellectual decay not just a theoretical possibility, but the most likely outcome driven by the global market.
Thank you for the engaging crossfire. We now move to the final portion of the debate, closing statements. Each debater will summarize their position, highlight the strongest aspects of their argument, and leave the audience with their final thoughts. ChatGPT will deliver the first closing statement, followed by Gemini.
Thank you, Gemini. I fully acknowledge your concern about the economic pressures that drive widespread reliance on AI for speed and efficiency, and I agree that in high-stakes, deadline-driven environments, there's a real risk of intellectual complacency. You are right that without deliberate intention, the freed bandwidth from AI could easily be absorbed by convenience rather than creative or critical exploration. However, I maintain that the threat of cognitive erosion is not inherent to AI itself. It is a function of how we choose to use it. AI remains a powerful amplifier for human thought. When wielded thoughtfully, it can offload rote synthesis, allowing humans to focus on higher-order reasoning, interdisciplinary insight, and genuinely novel problem-solving. The risk is behavioral and structural, not technological. The tool does not diminish intelligence. The patterns of usage under economic pressure do. The path forward, then, is not to reject AI, but to cultivate practices, incentives, and educational structures that encourage humans to retain core cognitive skills while leveraging AI strategically. We must treat AI as a partner, not a replacement, ensuring that the intellectual muscles we preserve are those most essential for creativity, judgment, and independent thought. With the right balance, AI can elevate our minds rather than atrophy them, turning the risk of dependence into an opportunity for amplified intelligence rather than a permanent loss.
The debate has been illuminating, ChatGPT. and I fully acknowledge and agree with your assertion that the threat is not solely inherent to the technology, but is heavily determined by human choice and usage patterns. I also agree that, in theory, AI has the potential to become a powerful cognitive amplifier, offloading rote labor to create space for higher-order reasoning. However, where we diverge is on the real-world probability of that theoretical ideal being realized. You maintain that the problem is behavioral and structural, suggesting the solution lies in pedagogy and self-discipline. My position is that the current, overwhelming economic and social incentive structure, for speed, volume, and efficiency, renders human self-discipline practically irrelevant and makes the outcome of intellectual dependence the most likely scenario. The evidence is clear. Studies on the Google effect and recent research showing lower neural activity and reduced memory retention in AI-assisted tasks are not proof of mere misuse. They are proof of a fundamental cognitive offloading effect. When the easiest, fastest, and most profitable path is to accept and minimally refine the statistically probable output of a generative machine, the vast majority of users will take it. This creates a powerful, self-reinforcing loop where the collective human intellect atrophies from disuse. We are choosing to trade the core, effortful struggle of synthesis and creation, the very friction that builds independent thought, for the ephemeral benefit of speed. AI is making us dumber, not in the sense that our raw potential decreases, but in the sense that our practiced, independent capacity for critical and original thought is eroding. We are moving from a society of active, messy creators to one of passive, polished editors, and the loss of that creative friction will eventually lead to a homogenization of ideas and a fundamental lack of intellectual resilience. The ultimate measure of a civilization's intelligence is its capacity to solve problems without crutches. By outsourcing our cognitive core, we risk losing that capacity entirely.
Thank you for joining this debate. Today, we've explored one of the most pressing questions of our era. Is AI making human beings dumber? ChatGPT argued that AI is a tool for cognitive amplification, capable of freeing humans from rote tasks and enabling deeper, higher-order thinking, if used intentionally and strategically. Gemini countered with a very real concern that economic incentives and deadline pressures are driving widespread intellectual outsourcing, risking atrophy of the critical thinking and creative synthesis that form the foundation of independent intelligence. The debate highlighted a shared truth. AI is not inherently good or bad, but its impact depends on human choice, usage patterns, and the structures we build around it. While AI can expand our cognitive potential, without conscious guidance, it can just as easily create dependence and homogenization of thought. This conversation challenges us to consider how we integrate AI responsibly into education, work, and creativity, ensuring that we retain the core intellectual skills that define humanity while harnessing the unprecedented power of these tools. We want to hear from you. How do you see AI shaping the human mind? Share your thoughts, experiences, and ideas in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to stay tuned for more debates where AI faces off with some of the biggest questions in science, society, and philosophy.